Good evening, everyone, and thank you for making it. Hopefully, we'll be able to get home back all dry. I want to go back to our study of Tanya. Very brief, short review of what we studied until now. The rabbi explained that not only God's creation, joy is a must to live a full life. Joy and simcha, simcha is joy in Hebrew, is a must. But in addition to serve God, you cannot unless there is joy. And the rabbi explained the fact that the Proverbs tell us that in every sadness there is a profit, there is a benefit. First, it's not talking about the sadness itself, but rather about the outcome in the future. And the rabbi explains that sometimes we need to crush the evil, and that happens when we are bitter and very sad about our conduct. And that will crush the evil, as we will discuss at great length in the coming chapters. This chapter is a miniature of discussion that we're going to be developing. The rabbi today, that's how far we went. Joy is the most important. And number two, if there is sadness for defeating the evil, there must be a benefit, but the benefit is the outcome, not the actual sadness. Tonight, the rabbi is going to talk about what happened when I have good reasons to be sad. I shared with you in the last 2 weeks that God created the universe where there are events or days or moments in our life that sadness is what is called for. There are days in our Jewish calendar where there is sadness, although those sadness are a jumping boat for great joy. As I shared with you, the month of Tishrei, we have Sukkot and Simchat Torah, Purim, after all the pain of the Haman. So in the month of Av, the 9 days, then you have the 15th of Av, the happiest. But the fact is, there are sad days. What happened if I have a depressing moment? I should say again, and maybe I shared that before, and if I didn't, I should have, that we are not dealing with chronic ailment. People who are depressed, who are faced with chronic mental depression or emotional depression, they must seek the doctor's assistance. They must go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist and be medicated and treated properly. This is not the place. What we are dealing is with an average person who faces challenges. I got fired. My spouse don't want to live with me anymore. My children are giving me grief. There are all kinds of reasons that happen, and this is the purpose of this discussion. There are two categories in general that can be causing us to be sad. One is physical, mental, and the other is spiritual. I wanted to be accepted to college. I wanted to have a relationship with my parents. I wanted to find a wife or a husband. I wanted to be blessed with children. I want to speak Hebrew. And it didn't work out. It didn't work out because people cheated me, because I couldn't afford it, because I have no talent in that way. All that is what the Rebbe is going to be discussing here. I want to give you an introduction or a jumping board into the discussion and give you the summary. The rabbi is telling us, and what's fascinating, when the book came out, those who cared not to criticize because it's a chassid, but to study it, they said this is marvelous, it's a gem, this book, Tanya. And part of the reason is the Rebbe revealed and explained things that are found in the Talmud, in the Torah, that there is no other way to explain them. We studied with the Tanya and the oath, be righteous, don't be wicked. There is no other way to explain it other than the way we explained it in the first 12 chapters. There is a text in the Talmud, in Tractate Berachot, A person must bless and thank God for evil, for negativity, in the same way it does for a blessing and happiness. And one can ask, how is it possible? Well, cannot be buried in the sand like the ostrich. It's called bad, negative. It's called bad. So someone who is blessed with a child makes a blessing. Thank you, God. Someone who lost a child, which is the greatest pain, must thank God. It says you have to thank God when someone loses a child. And one can ask, the Torah calls it evil. The Torah calls it bad. How is it possible? This is exactly what the rabbi is going to address. In addition, the blessing for negativity is different than a blessing for happiness. When someone's blessing happened, you have to say one blessing, Shechianu. When negativity happened, God forbid a fire destroyed a house, God lost a very close relative, we say the blessing Atov ve'ametiv. God is kind and he's acting in kindness to me. And that's the other point the rabbi is making. If you have to thank God for a blessing the same as you for a curse, how come the blessings is different? This is what the rabbi is going to address. But I shared with you last week about this passage in the Talmud, Rabbi Berish of Meislish, the rabbi in Krakow and Warsaw, very wealthy. He had rafts, and one day he lost all his wealth. Very famous rabbi. And he didn't know how to break the news to him. Finally, somebody says, I will, I'm his student. And he says, Rabbi, remember we studied this Talmud, you have to bless God and thank God for a curse like a blessing. He said, of course. Can you explain that? And the rabbi explained and explained and explained that it's called from God, and God is good, and God will never do something negative. And if God did it, it must be great. And the rabbi and the student is asked, and Rabbi, that applies even if someone lost his source of income. And he said, of course. And even if he lost everything he owned and he became homeless, and the rabbi says, of course, he should be dancing because God is very kind to us and it's a blessing. So the man says, the student turned to the rabbi and says, if so, it's time for you to start dancing. And he fainted.
Yeah.
When he woke up, some say he said, this Talmudic passage is difficult for me to comprehend. But just moments earlier, he explained it with all the fervor. He knew it very well, and it made sense. It's the right thing. Hasidic teaching tells us that there is a major difference between ideology, philosophy, and reality. When reality hits, it's a whole different ballgame. And that's what happened. Yes. To get Diana Emes, you say, for a close relative. But when someone loses very close, the Gemara says they must say a Tov HaMetiv also. The fact that we don't say it, I did not see anybody saying it, is because we don't really mean it.
Mm.
But that's the Talmud tells us you're supposed to say that. And the rabbi is going to address that.
Mm.
The reason we must what the rabbi is going to tell us the following. Everything we as Jews believe that everything is from God. God does not forget or does not see anything. Every small detail of our life and the universe and other galaxies are all from God. And therefore, if it's God, from God, God is very kind. God is good. And if he's good, there is no bad that can come out of God. Then you have a question. How is it possible if it feels very bad? Losing somebody, losing the ability to do work, separation, it's very painful. How can you be happy and joyous and call it good? After all, the Talmud calls it negative. So I want you to know that the Rebbe is going to address, to serve God, there must be simcha, and even negativity is for the purpose of simcha. Before I share with you the idea the Rebbe is going to make, the Rebbe is going to make it that it is an unequivocal way. Only way to serve God is with joy. Last week we read in the Torah, as I mentioned last week's class, all the curses that come to, it's in the Tanya we study it, is because you served God without joy. God is showering us with blessings and we forget about joy. We see it in our generation. There is more antidepressant medication that are administered today than ever before. It's the single most, the highest
Prescribed drug, yeah.
consumed category of medication. And never 50 years ago, 70 years ago, when there was the Great Depression here in the country, or people in the Holocaust or World War really lost everybody and were homeless, there was no depression. Now suddenly we are blessed in ways that we never imagined ever in the history of the universe. Now we're very depressed. As we'll discover, as the Torah tells us, because God blessed us with so much, and therefore we serve God without joy. And God is very upset. The key to connect with God is joy. And for that, I want to show you a few stories, and then we'll see how the Rebbe addresses this question. How is it possible that negativity, bad, is a source of joy? There were two brothers, very well known in the Chabad, in the Hasidic communities. One is Reb Pinchas, and the other is Reb Shmuel Horowitz. They were the students of the Mezritch Magi 250 years ago. One day they came to the Rebbe, the Mezritch Magid, and they turned to him and says, how is it possible to thank God if I have no money to feed my children? How is it possible to thank God if I don't even have a bundle of straw to put my head over? How is it possible to thank God if my roof is leaking and I can't even think about fixing it, so I sleep while there is water coming down, and in the winter we almost freeze to death from the snow? And the Rebbe says to him, the Mezritch Magid had a way of teaching people by sending him to one of his students. He would say, go there and ask them the question. So he told him, go to a town called Anipoli, find a Jew by name of Zushe. Zushe is my student, and I'm sure he will be able to answer the question. So they traveled to Anipoli, and they asked, where is Zushe? Oh, Zushe, you mean Zushe? Yeah, there is one Zushe. He lives at the edge of town. They come, they walk into that edge of town. They see in front of themselves, not even a house, a shack, a tent that was tied to two trees. And they knock on the door. The walls are literally did not collapse because the trees are holding them. And there is pieces of the roof missing. There is no floor, there is mud. And he opens the door, and a man with beard opens the door. Are you Zusha? Yeah. Do you know the Mezritch Magid? He said, yeah. Well, he sent us to you to learn or to get an answer about how to serve God with joy, even if we are faced with financial burden and inability to fulfill our financial commitments. Reb Zusha turned to them, he says, I really don't know why he sent you to me, because I've never suffered this type of malady. God have never taken away anything from me. In fact, I'm extremely happy and thankful to God. I don't need any of that. So he looked at the walls. There was not even a table at the house. And they turned to each other and says, he could not give us the answer, but he actually did give us the best answer. It's actually, as we call it, part of an attitude. There was a Reb Aaron of Karlin, very famous rabbi. He was a friend of the Alter Rebbe that wrote the Tanya. He said before he died that if someone will come to pray to God at his gravesite, he will make sure to answer the prayer up in heaven. So he said, if you ever, and in particular for communal tragedies, if there is a famine, there is drought, there is a new order by the czar or by the leaders to evacuate, to higher taxes. Come to pray at my gravesite, and I will make so much noise up in heaven and help you to avert the decree. So sure enough, he died. A few months later, the community needed great help, and they knew what to do. They go to the Rabbi Aaron of Karlin, his gravesite, and they prayed, and they waited, and nothing happened. And they waited, and they went again and again and again for 6 months. They were praying and praying, and the situation gets worse and worse. Finally, one day he appears to the rabbi in a dream. And he says, you know, I promised the community that anytime you have need, you come to my gravesite and I'll pray on your behalf to God to get rid of the ailment. Now you wonder how come it didn't happen. And the reason is because here on earth, anything that happens is divided into two, evil or good, painful or pleasure. Up in heaven, there is only one. It's all pleasure. It's all good. It's from God. However, sometimes the good is so powerful that it comes to us in a very painful way. He says, but once I'm up in heaven, I see the positive. I see the good in that negativity, and therefore I can't pray to God to take it away. I'm not going to take away a blessing from you. And the rabbi is going to use an example. If you are looking at this, you go outdoors and the sun is shining, it's very light, right? It's light. What happens if you look at the sun directly? You can't see anything. You look at the sun for 5 seconds. After that, look away, everything is dark. You're blinded by the sun. Why? Because it's too bright for your eyes. There's the Rebbe. This is the Rebbe's teaching. When there is good, it's a blessing. When there is bad, when there is negativity, it's not good, it's good double. And because it's so good, it feels very, very painful. It feels very, very bad. Just like looking at the sun. I know you're going to challenge it, and I understand. I challenge us too, but I'm just sharing with you. That will explain the Talmud, and that will explain the difference. The rabbi will tell us that only people who are close to God end up suffering. That answered the question, how come righteous men suffer? Everybody's asking, righteous men suffer, wicked men. That's part of the answer, but we're going to get as we're going to get to details. In other words, God will choose to shower someone with such great blessings that it feels, I can't live long. I cannot feel good. I lose my spouse. There is going to be another negative, another bitterness or source of sadness, and that is when somebody misbehave, don't obey God. And that's the rabbi is going to talk about later. However, what the rabbi's goal here, and I cannot say it enough, is to realize that sadness has no place in Judaism. And serving God, the gateway must be joy. The fact that we have events that cause pain and are called sad moments is not bad. It's actually better than the regular days. So I want to share some stories to drive this point on. There was a there's so many stories. I'm debating which one to post. There was a Jew that used to do business with many landowners, large landowners that were not Jewish. I think it was in Ukraine. And he was Jewish, a Chassid. This is 200 years ago. He invested in planting wheat seeds. He would sell all these landowners seed just before the season for planting the seeds. And there are different grades, there are different type of grain, and he would sell it. He became the guy that they would do business with. He would carry, so where would they do the business? each one, both, he would travel into somewhere in the middle of the road, a few days drive with his horses to a spot, an inn, a large hotel, and all those people, 20, 30 of them, they would come into that inn, they would shake hands, party, and then he would sell them the wagons with the wheat, and he'll go back with the horses. They had their own horses, they would bring, and they would buy the wagons with sacks, with big, large bags of grain. And they were different. They trusted him because they knew he's a very faithful, honest man, and they wanted particular grain, and they knew they can trust him. So if it says this is grade A, this is red, this is green, they knew exactly, and every year they would do, and he became very wealthy. One year, he was traveling with his manager. He had a few drivers. It was an entourage of horses and wagons. And he was sitting in the wagon with his manager. They already drove, and they were near, like an hour away from the inn where they're going to meet. And suddenly he realized that the real most important grain, the material that he was supposed to bring, he forgot. This is the most treasured, the highest paid material, and this is everybody wanted some of. And if he's not going to have it, they are going to dump him. They're not going to take any of his material, any of his grain, and they're going to cut him off, and they're going to find somebody else. So the manager, now they cannot go back, because if they go back, they wouldn't be there on time, and the landowners would say, oh, he cheated us, he said he'll be here, and he's not here. So the manager turned to this Jew, and he says, what are you going to do? He says, we'll find out. Suddenly he got up in the wagon and started dancing and singing a happy song. And the manager looks at him and he says, what happened? Did you lose your mind? What are you doing? This is the most difficult. And the man continues dancing with great joy, as if he's about to win the lottery. When he come down, he turned to the manager and he says, when we get to the hotel, go into the bar and order the tastiest punch that they offer. I think the story is punch. I think that it was a hard liquor, the most aged liquor, and make sure that don't spare any money, because I want to have a good time with the landowners. And the manager says, if that's what you say, because you're doomed. So they come into the hotel, they rent a room, they put in the stable all the horses. And he goes down and he asks the manager, is the punch is ready? And the manager says, yeah, I did as you told me. And he says he's going to go into the cellar, bring in very, very special vodka or whiskey and mix it with fruit juice. It's going to be something nobody tasted before. The merchants, the landowners come in, and he greets them with great joy. Hey, I missed you a whole year. It's so nice to see you. I have a very special occasion today because we've seen each other. We have punch. And he tells them about the punch that he prepared for them, and they like it. And so they come down right away, and they start drinking. While they're drinking, they drink so much that they get drunk. Once they get drunk, they go back to the rooms and they sleep the night. The Jew also got drunk, and he also went to bed. Tomorrow in the afternoon, those merchants wake up. The punch is still hovering and they go downstairs, and they realize that there was a major, major rainstorm that came overnight and washed everything outside, including the wagons with all the grain in there.
Boy.
Now grain is completely gone, kaput. So they come into that bar, to the cafeteria, and they see this man, and he's still happy. And they said to him, they all band together, and they say, we feel so sorry for our businessman. We want to make sure he continues providing us. He had just lost everything he bought for us. How about we all pay him fully for what he was supposed to give us? and so that it should be worth it for him next year to bring the same. And they all agreed to chip in. So they turned to him and it says, Mr. Moshe, we know you lost everything, all your merchandise, but don't worry. Worry not. We can afford it. We know that for you it's much difficult. We are going to divide all of the wagons that you are selling us every year. We're going to give you the same amount and we're going to go home empty-handed. And don't worry, we'll meet again next year. And they made up a date. And they gave him the full amount. On the way back, the manager turned to him and he says, I just witnessed a miracle. Tell me, how did you achieve that miracle? Where did the rain comes from? What happened? So the man says to him, my Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, the grandson of the Alter Rebbe, I came to a private audience to him and he said to me, remember that when there is a great event, a grave event about to happen, through joy and l'chaim, you can get out of the worst possible condition. And I had no idea why the Rebbe is saying that to me. This happened many months ago. And I was, all the time I was thinking, what the Rabbi is talking about? If I face a very grave event, I should remember that great joy and l'chaim will take me out of it. Until yesterday, when we were riding and we forgot that grain, I said to myself, my future is gone. I'm in the worst possible situation. What do I do? And then I remember what the Rebbe told me. So I stood in the wagon and started dancing. Then I said to myself, I got to say l'chaim. I have to have everybody participate. So I told you to get the punch. And you know what? God made a miracle. God would love to give us the reasons to be happy if we show him that we trust him. That's what the Rabbi is talking about. There was a man, I met him, Reb Zalman Gurari. He passed away about 10 years ago. He was close to the Rebbe, and he used to tend to have some type of depression. And the Rebbe continuously rebuked him over that. One time the Rebbe got up and opened up the Zohar, which is the source of Kabbalah, and opened up the book and says, read. It says over there that someone who has no joy has no godliness. God is not there. So he turned to the Rebbe on another occasion. Again, the discussion was about joy. And he says, Rebbe, help me. Take away my depression. And the Rebbe turned to him and he says, fighting depression is part of the service of God. And therefore, it will never be taken away from you. In other words, finding reasons to be depressed and sad is the tactic of the evil. Just like you're not going to ask for the evil to be gone, because that's part of our proof to God that we are faithful, so is the reasons to be sad. So someone yells at me, someone embarrasses me, someone cheated me. There are many, many reasons, and there is a reason to be depressed. A chassid, someone who's connected to Tanya, will never, never be sad. They will say, we have a reason to be happy. Are they ignorant? Are they burying their head in the sand? No, but they know that God's blessing, the greatest blessings, come from something that's very painful and negative. Here is some more stories. There was a chassid that helped the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin. He used to assist in the house. His name is Reb Shalom Gansburg. One year for Sukkot, the Rebbetzin, the Rebbe's wife, said to him to put the awning over the sukkah because rain is coming. It shouldn't ruin the sukkah because in the sukkah probably they had books. And then before the holiday comes in, they should open up the awning because otherwise the sukkah is not kosher. The sukkah must have a schach, a wood covering the roof, not an piece of awning. And he forgot. And the Rebbe came and made Kiddush. And when he discovered that the Rebbe made Kiddush in the sukkah, and the sukkah was not kosher, he was devastated. He was in such pain that for a few days he couldn't do anything. One day, 3 days later, I think the Rebbe turned to him and he says, you know, assuming there was a sin done, you cannot atone one sin with another sin. Sadness is a sin. If I committed a sin, to atone for it with another sin, with sadness, is not going to take away that sin. But you can serve God, you can connect to God out of joy. That's a way to fight the sin. Another Chassid said that the evil inclination will want to make us, for us to sin. He is not so much interested in the sin as much as he's interested in the depression we get into after we realize we did something against God. In other words, the benefit the evil inclination gets from sin, eating not kosher, not celebrating a holiday, is minimized compared to the outcome afterwards that we get depressed. How come I'm far from God? How come I can't serve God? We need to understand it's a trap that the evil is setting to find reasons and excuse to make us stay away from God. And the best way for him to do it is by making us depressed. So no matter what, even if it's a very negative behavior, I did not behave, I am far from God, it's a legitimate reason to be, to so to say, feel bad. It is quite the opposite. We need to fight it with joy. Yeah.
Can Chassid be a tzaddik and the tzaddik not be a Chassid?
Yes, of course. The definition of a Chassid is always joyous. So there'll be a tzaddik, and he's not so happy. There were two Hasidim that were in jail in Russia, in Siberia. They both were taken to jail because they had a teaching. They were teaching during the communist regime. So they're not, prisoners are not allowed to talk to each other. But the only place they can talk is when they are urinating. So that makes noise so they can go to the bathroom. And while they're doing their business, they talk to each other. So those two Hasidim met. They didn't know they were taken to jail because they were in two different towns. I knew both of them, and both of them were neighbors of me. One is Reb Mendel Futterfass. I'm going to be speaking about him on Yom Kippur, God willing. The other is Reb Moshe Bishetsky, also a neighbor of mine. I knew them. They made it to Israel in Kfar Chabad, and when I grew up, they were there. So one Chassid turned to the other and he says, "How are you doing?" And the other says, "How am I doing? I'm here for 2 years. I cannot put on tefillin. I cannot put on tzitzit and bless the tzitzit. I have no matzah. I have no sukkah. I have no prayer book. I have no Torah to study. So you're asking me, how am I doing? It's the worst situation that a human can dream about." And the other Chassid turned to him and he says, "I feel sorry for you, because the communists were able to take control over your body. Are you going to let them take control over your soul?" In other words, when you are depressed over the condition, you're allowing the communists to take over your soul. And this is the other Chassid realized that this attitude needs to change. I think I shared with you one more story, and then we'll get to some. 250 years ago, in the time of the Alter Rebbe, there was a famous wealthy man by the name of Zev Velvel. Zev is wolf. In Yiddish, it's wolf. Velvel Vilenkin. He was opposing the Hasidim. He was part of those who opposed the Hasidim, and then he became a great Hasid. And once he related the reason he became a Hasid. He says he was actually in Vilna. In Vilna. Vilna is in part of Ukraine?
No, Lithuania.
Lithuania, makes sense. He says he was walking by one day, he was very wealthy. So from him to walk to synagogue, he would go by the street. But one day he decided to take a roundabout through the poor people's street, where people have homes that are made up of shacks. And he hears a bunch of people singing. And he come closer, he decided he was curious. He had a little extra few moments. And he looked through the window, he sees there's a bunch of people sitting around the table and celebrating and very happy. So he said to himself, there must be a simcha here, a bris, a circumcision, a bar mitzvah, a wedding. Let me join. You know, in ancient times, Jews don't have to be invited, and there was no RSVP. When my father heard that you need an RSVP and you're going to be a seating arrangements, he almost fell on his face. He said to me, gosh, how far have you gone? But I explained to him that people will not show if that doesn't exist. But in Israel, I don't know if you know, for a wedding, they only guesstimate, because nobody says if he's coming or not, they guesstimate, and the caterer always keeps another 30 to 50 portions just in case. How many times I've been to my siblings' weddings, children's weddings, and they had to add tables, 3 tables, 4 tables, 30 people. Nobody complains, it's part of the deal, because you don't send reservations. It happens here. Right. I'm not going to respond to it. I'm just going to show it to you. I read in the news today that a man came to synagogue this last Shabbat, and he says, I deserve a big mazel tov. I had a baby girl born to me in my Manatee's hospital in Borough Park. And he was in Shabbat. He just came from the hospital. And they did a prayer for a blessing of a child, of a daughter, and they named her. Then he goes home for Kiddush, and his parents are there. The wife is in the hospital. And he starts, kissing and hugging everybody. And then he says, I named my daughter, Hannah Hensha. And his sister says, what? It was a boy. I just read it in the news today. He already named her. It was a boy. What happened? This is the news, you'll see it everywhere. What happened is that it's a premature baby at this 7 months. And when the baby was delivered, immediately they took the baby to an incubator because it was very small. So he turned to the nurse and he says, is it a boy or a girl? And she said, it's a girl. So he runs to synagogue to name the girl in the Torah. He didn't want to miss that. His sister remained with his wife, with her sister-in-law. And when the nurse came back, I said, it's a boy. Are you sure? Yeah, it's a boy. So she went home for lunch. He came home for lunch. And he's happy and celebrating that he has a daughter. She has already a name, and it's a boy. So it's going to be a very special bris. I don't think it will be this Shabbos, but back to our discussion here. So this Velvol Velenkin, he sees not Hasidim, Jews in a shack, and he hears them singing and very happy. So he decided to walk in to say L'chaim. He walks in, and he sees the table is empty. There's no food except a bottle of vodka. Hasidim must go with vodka. And they're passing around the cover of the bottle for drinking. There was no even paper cups they couldn't even buy. So he sits down and he says to them, they're dancing and celebrating. He turned to one and he says, must be a special simcha today. He said, yeah, you see the guy sitting in the back? In the guy, there was a man all bandaged all over his hands and his face. Only you can see his eyes. And he's sitting there and he's very happy. He says, yeah, there is a very big simcha. He deserves a big joy. He says, oh, so if so, allow me to buy you more food for the simcha. Jews, when you come to a simcha and you see a need, first thing you do is you take responsibility. He can afford it, they cannot. So he said, I'll go and buy you some goodies, cookies, cakes, bagels, cream cheese, deluxe, the deal. He says, no, we don't want it. He said, why? He says, because we are so happy with each other without the food. We fear that the food is going to interfere with our joy and love. We don't want it. We're happy without. So he stays there and they sang and dance and they sing and they're very happy. Finally, he's curious. He's there already for 45 minutes. They don't want any food. They can't afford any food. He wants to know what's the occasion. What's the occasion can be a bris, the baby is with the mother, a bar mitzvah, a wedding, a sheva brachot. What's the occasion? So one of the guys turned to him and he says, have you heard of the Hasidic group? And he said, sure, the cat. They are called the cat. Cat means the cult. The cult. The non-Hasidic wanted to give reasons for people not to connect with the Hasidim, so they call them cult. Language is very powerful. And we know during the Holocaust, everything, the name has an impact. So I heard of the cult. I'm not part of the cult. I'm not part of the cut. So they said to him, you see this man? He is one of those non-Hasidic group. But he discovered the teaching of the Alter Rebbe and he became a Hasid. But he had to hide himself, do it in disguise, because he was afraid for his life. Well, guess what? Yesterday, they discovered he's a Chassid, and they beat him up. They beat him up so badly that you cannot even recognize his face. So he just came back from the hospital. Thank God he survived. So we are very, very happy that he's alive. He says, that's the reason of our party. He says, that's why he is the cause of our celebration. Even though he's all Band-Aid, and you can see his face, but he's alive and he's going to recover. So very, very happy for him. And that's why we're dancing. So he left. He says, the joy, the true joy the Hasidim had, without the need of a bagels and lax, without the need for a punch, it's something that penetrated my heart. And I saw this is something that I'm missing. And that's what made him to become a Hasid. Joy is contagious. Joy is what the essence of life. Joy is the only way to serve God. If you are not joyous, you are not able to serve God. Let's study a little bit.
Can you be happy 100% of the time, Rabbi?
No.
I can be happy now.
I'm not perfect. I'm not perfect. But I should tell you that I have had challenges in the last 5 years that I wish on no one. And you really don't know the challenges because nobody will find out. And from the moment, and I thank God for making that choice, I said to myself, what does God, as we could discover this now, what does God want from me at this moment? Why did he do it for me? He definitely did not want me to be depressed. I did not deserve that. It was very painful, most painful experience I ever had in my life. And I said to myself from the first moment, I will not be depressed. I will not give up. I will find what God wants from me, as we'll see it in details. And I am so proud of myself. Now, over time, this was an event that happened to both me and my wife. Over time, after 2 weeks, 3 weeks time, you get depressed because the challenges keep mounting. In other words, you feel you have come through something that you never experienced, and it's the worst. And then you get even worse, and then it gets worse. And it really, for about a year and a half, it was the low going lower and lower and lower. After 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you're drained. You're drained. Especially nobody outside is supposed to know or knows anything that's going on. So my wife would take over and encourage me. And then at times I would encourage my wife. That's part of the reason you need to have a spouse. We will deal with this in details. And today I look at 5 years later, 4 years later, and thank God I'm in a much better situation, there is no doubt. But that's not the point I'm making. I'm looking back at those times, and I say how lucky I was that I made the right choice. In other words, if I didn't make the right choice, I would have gone through the same exact painful experience and even worse. And later on, I would feel bad. Why did I have to go through it? But because I chose to serve God, and what does God want from me at this moment, and use it or help or continue fighting, even though I wasn't victorious, I wasn't successful with my fights, but the attitude was there. It made, today I look back and I say, this is one of the things I'm going to take back to God. When I go back to God on 120, and God is going to say to me, you wasted your life. God is going to say to me, why didn't you utilize all your talent? Why didn't you inspire others? There is one thing in my life, the year and a half of my experience, I'm going to turn to God and I said, I guarantee you I couldn't done anything better. So you need to understand what we're studying here. It's should be part. That's why I'm sharing with you, because unfortunately, today it's very sad that people get depressed, even for good reasons. How many people suffered great ailment? How many people lost a spouse? How many? I'm going to talk about on Rosh Hashanah that the Jewish people, we call it in the universe, seeing is believing. That's the way life is. Jews say believing is seen. What you believe is what will happen. The Maccabees in Hanukkah, they stood against the mightiest army in the universe. Not what they saw they believed in, because if what they saw is what they believed in, they wouldn't even try. But they believed that God is on their side, and therefore they saw the victory. And it's actually happened. That's the way the Jewish people, and we need to understand that the Tanya gives us the right tools, no matter how low life is, no matter what the tragedy, and God should not test any one of us because we ask God not to test us, because in many cases we do give up. The idea is at least know that it's not right and try to change, get up and move on. That's what the purpose of the Tanya. I'm going to read the introduction. You know what? It's not going to be, we're not going to have time, so I'm going to conclude here. I'm just going to conclude, and that is going to be the full introduction to what we're going to study. We know that in the history of the universe, anytime there is something negative, it must be a blessing, and a greater blessing than a blessing. It doesn't feel that way, and you cannot call it a blessing. But in truth, deep down, and for that, I'm going to show you some stories from the Talmud or the Bible, the Torah that you know. The first is Joseph. Here is a very brief story. His brother hated him. They were jealous of him. They threw him into a dungeon full of snakes and scorpions. They sold him as a slave. He was put in jail for not willing to cheat on his master. And later on, and he was always steadfast in his trust and joy. How do we know that he was joyous despite all the challenges? The Torah tells us one day he was in jail. He turned and he sees the two ministers, the butler and the butcher, are depressed. And he turned to them and says, why are you faces depressed today? Lama pneichem ra'im. Tell us the sages. He had such a good attitude to life in jail. He had so much happiness, he couldn't take it when someone is not happy. And that's why he turned to, it's in the Torah, in the text. He turned to them, he says, Lama pnechem ra'im? Why? And then they shared with him the story of the dreams. If anybody is familiar with the story, that they had dreams. And one's dream he interpreted that he's going to return back to his job, the butler, and the butcher is going to, not the butcher, the baker, I'm sorry. The baker is going to be hung. He's going to hang him. Pharaoh on his birthday is going to. But the fact that he turned to him and says, why are you depressed? Is because he was a happy man. Later on, when the brothers come and they're afraid of revenge, he turned to them, he cried, and he said to them two things that are very powerful. He said, not you have sent me here, but God have sent me here to save the entire land from famine. That's the first thing. His attitude, even though they did the worst, they wanted to murder him, then they did even worse than murdering. Selling him as a slave, he suffers for the rest of his life. He ended up in jail for 11, 12 years. I don't remember how many years. When they come back, not only he's not holding it against them, he says to them, it's not you, it's God who is doing it. And the second thing he tells them, you thought it's something negative. God has had a thought about positive, and he did it for a positive purpose. Now, how long did it take him to realize it was all positive? 22 years. 22 years later, he discovers that the reason he's in Egypt, in jail, is to interpret dreams so that Pharaoh's dreams can be interpreted by him, etc. So God had made all this story to save the universe and to make him the ruler so his family can come as the royal family. In other words, he saw that even the worst act that can be happening by his own brothers was a blessing, and it was directly by God. This is one story. The second is Rabbi Akiva. The Talmud tells us Rabbi Akiva was on a journey once, and he carried with him three things. Anybody heard the story? What are the three things?
Donkey.
A donkey, a rooster, and
A lamp?
a candle. Right. A donkey to ride on, a rooster to wake him up in the morning. He did not have iWatch, so he needed somebody to wake him up so he can continue on his journey, so he had a rooster. And the lamp was for the candle to study Torah at night. When you don't travel, at night you cannot travel, you don't see the road, you're not sure. So the candle will allow him to study Torah. He came into a town and they refused to host him. Nobody would take him in. There was no hotels. You stay with somebody who is willing to be kind. Nobody wanted. So he left town, he went to the field, and he decided to stay in the field and sleep there. While he was putting together some straw, a lion came from nowhere and devoured the donkey. And he says, Gamzu letova. He says, whatever God does is for good. Next, an hour later, a cat, a big cat, came out and ate the rooster. And he says, whatever God does is for good. And then a strong wind came and blew the lamp, blew the candle. Now he cannot study, he had no lighter. So in the middle of the night, he hears commotion. And he's quiet. There is a group of bandits passing by. And they are going towards that town. And they went and they took over that town. They robbed and murdered every single person in that town. And then he sees them running, going back with all the loot. He turned in the morning, he got up and he turned to God. He says, oh God, thank you for saving my life. He says, had they been willing to allow me to stay there, I wouldn't be alive. If my donkey was alive, he would start making noise when he heard the commotion of the horses. If my rooster would be there, he would do the same. If my lamp would be here, they would see the light when they pass by. So he turned to his students when he showed the story, he says, everything God does is for good. Sometimes you see the good immediately. Sometimes you see it later. Sometimes you never see it. Every event the Rebbe is going to teach us that is painful, that is a loss, a very hurtful, it is greater than just good. It's much deeper good that feels to us as if it's not good, but we must say a blessing and thank God for it. And next week we will continue. The Rebbe will explain it in great details. Thank you very much.
Yasher Koach, Rabbi. Thank you.